Good afternoon. There will be more agendas shortly. We did not expect this large of a crowd. So I'm going to ask everyone to please listen closely to the way the Planning Commission operates, since we have a big crowd here today. First of all, I'd like to call to order the October 2016 City of Columbia Planning Commission meeting. Welcome to the Planning Commission members, staff, and guests. I would ask that everyone turn their cell phones and PDAs to the silent or vibrate mode. The administrator will now proceed with the roll call.
Mr. Stern?
Present.
Mr. Stigemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Taylor? Here. Ms. Hartz? Here. Mr. Cohn?
Here.
Mr. Dinkins? Here. Mr. Waits? And Mr. McDuffie. We have quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to briefly review the meeting format. Applicants with requests before the Planning Commission are allotted a presentation time of 10 minutes. This time should include, but is not limited to, an overview of the project, case history, and any pertinent meetings held regarding the request. This time also includes all persons presenting information on behalf of the applicant, such as attorneys, engineers, and architects. This time limit does not include any questions asked by the Planning Commission or staff regarding these requests. Members of the general public are given the opportunity to address their concerns in intervals of 2 minutes. The administrator has a timer and will make presenters aware of when their time has expired. The Planning Commission reserves the right to amend these procedures on a case-by-case basis. The consent agenda. The Planning Commission uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. Examples of such items include approval of site plans, annexations, and street names. If a member of the Planning Commission or the general public would like to discuss an item on the consent agenda, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The Planning Commission then approves the remaining consent agenda items. The administrator will now read the consent agenda, and we do have 2 consent agendas we're going to have today because we have a recusal on one.
Okay. Which item was that?
I submitted a statement earlier today. It was Section 2, Item 9, 350 Wayne Street. Cox and Dinkins is the civil engineer of the project.
Could I suggest we have a motion to take care of the one, and Mr. Dinkins can recuse himself, and then we can just move right on in to the other
All
ones?
right. If I could get one of the members to make a motion on the consent agenda for 350 Wayne Street, TMS 089-130401.
I'd like to make a motion to approve item 9 on the consent agenda, 350 Wayne Street.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? It's approved. And now we'll go with the remaining items of the consent agenda.
The remaining items on your consent agenda consist of the annexation comprehensive plan map amendment and zoning map amendment for Wood Creek Farms, TMS number 258000347, a partial portion. The other item is also an annexation and comprehensive plan map amendment and zoning map amendment for Wood Creek Farms. That's tax map number 25800-0327. The next item is a comprehensive plan amendment for 3403 Lyles Street, a comprehensive plan and future land use map for 1917 Wiley Street, a zoning map and amendment for 1917 Wiley Street, a map amendment for 1409 Yuji Street and NX 409 Gervais Street, a zoning text and map amendment for 2150 Hardin Street for the Babcock Building Wings, that would conclude the remaining portions of the consent agenda.
Thank you. Do any commission members or guests today wish to have items on the consent agenda removed and placed on the regular agenda? If not, I'd like to call for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move
Remaining
that,
items on the consent agenda.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Have a second? Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Consent agenda's approved. We will now proceed with the regular agenda.
The first item on your regular agenda this evening consists of 720 Maple Street, 2,801 and 2,813 and 2,835 Divine Street, as well as 724 Maple Street. This is a request for a PUD for this particular parcel. I'll get you through here in a minute. The applicant has worked with staff on this particular item. You'll note at the end of your case summary, there are some conditions. We did receive a clean copy of the document this afternoon from the developer. One copy was presented to Mr. Cohn at the desk, but they have amended the document to include all those items. And there's just one item on that condition number 4. We'd like you to just add an item that the developer would work with the zoning staff to come up with a percentage for that item, that there would not be more than X percentage of a reduction.
Okay. Are there any questions from the commissioners to staff?
I had a question regarding the height paragraph in the PUD document itself. Is some of these heights, is that consistent with some of the area around the subject site, or fill us in a little bit about that?
I'm going to let Brian answer that. And does everybody have their microphones on? Just double check.
Think so.
Would you like the applicant to come up and maybe talk about what signs they're proposing and
I
start
think
there?
I'm more interested in what the surrounding area, how the compatibility of this would fit with what else is around there, or staff's thought on that.
But generally, majority of what you'll see on Divine Street is a mixture of C1, C2. It depends on what part of Divine Street you are on. Generally, for the Divine Street corridor, the height of the signs that you see obviously are in scale with the buildings. The ones that are proposed specifically for the Divine Street, while generally in character and scale with what is being proposed on the property, it depends on what part of Divine Street you are on. So, and it's just somewhat subjective. If we go to the sign requirements in our code of ordinance related to PUD, the requirements for signage is generally compatible with the signage in the underlying district, in this case, a mixture of C1 and C2. So to specifically answer your question, some is compatible and some is a little unique to this PUD.
Have we put a limit on bike parking?
Other than to what John just mentioned, the item number 4 on the percentage, there's no maximum limit currently on the bike parking. I think staff is going to work with the applicant moving forward to the city council zoning public hearing to come up with a certain percentage to kind of narrow it down with a max and maybe a minimum.
Any other questions? Is the applicant here?
Yes, the applicant's here.
Would he, the applicant?
can speak there. I'll figure out what's wrong with this.
Is that better?
Much.
Okay, sorry. So I was saying we've met with all the surrounding neighborhoods to come into an agreement of what would work best for this area. And the 5-story is anything that would front Divine Street, the back parcel that fronts Maple. We met with the neighborhood. They had some concerns about it directly on Maple, so we scaled that down to a 3-story height, and it would step back to a maximum of 4-story or 55 feet on the back side. And the photographs that you're looking at just show some of the structures that are kind of peppered in the neighborhood. You have churches that are 4 to 5. You've got 700 Woodrow, which we're the owner of, it's 7 stories. And then you have the Heritage, which looks like it's 9 stories. And then some 4 or 5-story office buildings mixed in with the other 2 and 3-story buildings along Divine Street. And there's even some homes back there in the newer section that there's some pictures of that are 3-story over parking, so essentially 4-story there as well. So we really feel like what we're bringing, while it may not be exactly what's all around it, it helps provide a good mix for the aesthetics of the property and helps create some density for more people to live on Divine Street.
Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this? Any other questions for staff? Okay. I'll call for a motion, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the request to rezone 720 Maple Street and the other parcels to the PUD zoning designation.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone oppose? Passes.
Mr. Chairman, you might just want to, I'm going to interrupt for a minute and just let the audience know that if anyone's here for the 2 items that were for Dreer High School, those were actually deferred by the applicant. So
Was
we
withdrawn.
won't be hearing, we won't be hearing those cases this evening. So I don't want anybody that might be here sitting all the way through the meeting just waiting for something. So.
Right. The Dreer High School has been withdrawn. It will come to us at a later meeting. Okay. I think we've talked about combining number 13 and 14. Items number 13 and 14, am I correct?
If you'd like to combine, so items 13 and 14, item 13 is a map amendment for a particular historic district, and the last item is actually a modification to the design guidelines for the district. So if you wanted to combine those together, you could, or you could hear them individually if you would like.
How do y'all feel?
Choice.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we combine items 13 and 14 and take them up at the same time. Second.
A second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone oppose? Combine items 13 and 14.
So items 13 was the zoning text amendment and for the consolidation of the Waverly protection areas A and B, and items 14 was the amendment to the design guidelines for the Waverly protection area. And I'm going to turn it over to our planner, Stacy Ritchie, and she's going to give you a presentation on the 2 topics.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The historic Waverly neighborhood is unique in Columbia, the first suburb of the city created after the Civil War. The area grew to prominence in the early and mid-20th century through its many fine schools, churches, and people. It became an African-American neighborhood starting at the turn of the century, and many of its historic buildings still evident today were part of the influx of African-Americans from all economic strata. Placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1989, Waverly's contribution to Columbia's history was finally starting to be recognized and recorded. Unfortunately, from that year until 2013, when the city's Historic Preservation Office conducted a survey, only 82 of the 137 contributing properties recorded in 1989 were still in existence. Just over 40% of this important resource had been demolished. Most of the demolition occurred before the neighborhood requested a local historic district in 2005, but at the time the guidelines had support for demolition review for only the central residential core. The neighborhood was therefore created with a central residential area A and an area B along the commercialized corridors, which you can see in this map, the darker green being area B, area A, the lighter area B. When the George Elmore store was demolished in 2012, it started a conversation that has finally led to the request today. Elmore's contribution to the civil rights movement as early as the 1940s makes him a pioneer for the cause, and his store on Gervais Street was a lightning rod both during his life and now, half a century later. City staff was contacted by the Waverly neighborhood leadership within the next 2 years and told that they were interested in having demolition protection for their commercial corridor, a ring of properties in Area B, which is where the George Elmore store had been located. Some buildings of particular concern included the Good Samaritan Waverly Hospital, which is an African-American hospital starting during segregation and listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2008, and which gained a historic marker in 2009, and Hill's Grocery at the corner of Oak and Gervais Street. And you have a handout in front of you. Good Samaritan is located at this top, in this top photo, and Hill Grocery at the bottom. Hill Grocery is also listed as part of a contributing building on the National Register. These buildings are essential to the story of African-American neighborhoods, which transformed themselves during segregation into self-sustaining entities, providing educational, religious, and commercial structures mixed in with their residential buildings. Waverly is the city's most intact example of this microcosm of the built environment responding to social and cultural pressures, and its surviving buildings are evidence of the era in which this neighborhood rapidly developed. Within Waverly, which is essentially a 4-block by 3.5-block grid, there is a university campus, the former hospital, 5 churches, 2 healthcare facilities, and an administration building for Richland County School District 1, among the many houses. Though many of these have historic roots in the area, these institutions and their need for land and parking has permanently altered the neighborhood. This constant pressure has the potential to multiply now that a large student housing development has been built to the west across Hardin Street at Hardin and Gervais, and Gonzalez Gardens complex to the east is slated for redevelopment. After several presentations by the city over the years and an ebb and flow in the priorities of the neighborhood, including the loss of longtime President Mrs. Hildebrand, the neighborhood re-energized the conversation in late 2015. And its leadership formally requested that we proceed with the process of updating and strengthening the guidelines for Waverly Protection Area. We subsequently held several meetings with the neighborhood, as well as 3 that we hosted ourselves. We sent out 2 separate mailings to all owners of record about these meetings, and we discussed with them changes to these guidelines. Many neighborhood residents indicated a preference to not only have demolition review added, but also review of exterior changes to the buildings. The buildings that would be affected by demolition review or exterior changes being reviewed in Area B are these 9 buildings listed or shown on your sheet. The buildings, as discussion about protecting buildings in Area B merged with concerns about strengthening Area A, the residential core, as well as adding review of parking lots to Area A, it seemed appropriate to simply combine the district into one singular district without an Area A and B. Residential and non-residential buildings still have separate language within the guidelines for new construction, as they have different design considerations. But this merger seems appropriate given the concerns of the neighborhood. It is worthwhile to note that the guidelines are not retroactive, and they are only applied when someone is initiating a project themselves. There are 3 major changes to the guidelines that are being proposed tonight. One is to combine Area A and Area B into one district. This accomplishes 2 things. It adds demolition review to the previous Area B sites, and it adds existing parking lot language, which is quite minimal, from Area B to also cover Area A. Number 2, it adds review of exterior changes to the entire area. This is still a protection area, so it's a minimal historic district as far as stringency. But the 4 things that we are would be reviewing roofs, retaining original roof shapes and dormers, but people can remove chimneys and they can put on any roof material they would like. We would review replacing siding, but vinyl siding is allowed in a number of instances. We would be encouraging the retention of historic windows. If they are beyond repair, then replacement should match. And of course, retaining original porches. Most of the porches, over 60%, have been altered. But those that remain, we would encourage retaining columns and railings where they exist. The 3rd change would be adding review of signage. This would only be for historic buildings or new construction. It would not go to non-historic existing commercial or institutional buildings. And those guidelines include excluding internally illuminated signs and having them mounted so they don't destroy historic features. Finally, city staff has presented a number of options to the neighborhood and has used best preservation practices as well as a practical understanding of the loss of historic fabric in the area on existing buildings to craft the proposed updated guidelines. Unique in its history, this neighborhood has a story unlike any other in Columbia, and what is left is entirely deserving of continued protection, and we would encourage a positive recommendation to City Council for adoption. Thank you. We also have Frank Houston, the neighborhood president, would like to give a presentation.
Okay, any questions on that? Okay, thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Frank Houston. I'm the president of Historic Waverly. I reside in the Waverly community. My wife and I have lived there for the past 20 years. I also have a daughter who lives in the lower Waverly community who's lived there for the past 15 years. With me are many of our residents, friends, supporters, some of whom lived in the Waverly area for most of their lives. After many meetings and consideration, the community has asked the City of Columbia Historic Preservation Office Planning and Development Review Board to look and again take a look at reviewing our protection overlay of the Waverly community, combining A and B into one District A. The Waverly Historic Neighborhood is the oldest African American community in Columbia. This historic 5 blocks Waverly neighborhood, as you have seen, as Stacy has outlined, once thrived as one of the most efficient and affluent neighborhood in Columbia. There resided many affluential doctors, teachers, lawyers, entrepreneurs in this Columbia area. They were involved and they were proud of their community, just as we are today. This predominantly black neighborhood is characterized by its diverse architecture and irregular sized lots. These properties were stylistically typical of the early 1900s. Bungalows, Queen Anne, Craftsman, Colonial Revival, influenced residents were all part of the fabric of Waverly. These homes, these early documented dwellings, like the Heights, Russell House, Historical 18. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. These documented dwellings, like the Russell Height House, Circle 1879, a vernacular, traditional Greek Italiano house, and these various 2 stories and 2.5 stories Queen Anne houses were residents, small, large, lateral, gable, central entrance dwellings, shotgun houses, bungalows. What is left, we are obligated to serve. We are obligated to save, like the Hill Grocery Store. We stand here wanting to reclaim and restore all of the abandoned lots and structures. Our historic Waverly mission statement is keeping our architectural integrity with the historic Waverly Overlay Protection. The Waverly Historic Neighborhood wants its remaining structures to retain their essential physical and visual features. This allows these structures to convey its history and its historic identity with its elements of the past. We are trying to preserve the past for future generations. This community, the Waverly Neighborhood District, encompasses the African American experience from the transformation of an all-white plantation community to a community of Black professionals. The structures in this community are diverse and different. From shotgun houses, as I mentioned before, to bungalows, to single stories and 2-story homes, each has its architectural and historical significance. We have 5 churches in the Waverly community: Bishop Memorial AME Church, St. Martin de Porres Catholic Church, St. Luke Episcopal Church, First Calvary Baptist Church that came out of Man Simon House in 1875, which was organized under a Bush Harbor in 1865. And we have First Nazareth Baptist Church, which was born out of First Calvary Baptist Church. First Calvary Baptist Church now owns 20% of the Waverly community. Then we have Allen University, which dates back to 1880, with its chapel, administration building, designed by John Anderson Langford, the United States' first registered African-American architect in 1920. Allen, this past summer, has rededicated the chapel auditorium, restoring it to its original glory, also dedicating the Bishop Norris Langston Hughes Library just this past summer. This community is steeped in Black history. It is unthinkable and inconceivable that an institution, a church, that owns 20% of the community, that is so much a part of this history, will see fit to change the landscape of our community by using the church for profit and gain. Moving away from the teachers of scriptures to gain profit. What the church should do is follow the lead of Allen University, restoring the history of this great historic community of ours. Thank you for your time. I would like to ask that you permit a few of my neighbors and individuals from the Waverly community to have 2 minutes, please, to again expound on what I've just said. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Question for staff. So, clarify, I'm a little unclear on what is being requested and what we have.
There are two requests, the two parts that you just combined. One is to combine the map between Area A and Area B, which has currently divided into two sections, combine that into one district so that we no longer would review items differently like we used to. They would all come under the same guidelines. We used to have in the guidelines a section for Section A and a section for Section B. By combining them, the entire guidelines would apply to all. One of the reasons for that would be, for instance, in Area B, there's some language, a few sentences about parking lots. There are actually parking lots in Area A. They have no language currently in the Area A section. But if you were to combine the map, combine it into one district, then the section of the guidelines that talk about parking lots would apply to the entire district. So it benefits those parking lots or potential new parking lots. It benefits the ability for staff in the neighborhood to review new parking lots coming into Area A. Formerly, they didn't have that. It also would allow demolition review, which was formerly only in Area A, to apply to the entire area. So that's one thing, is combining. The other thing would be the three major changes to the guidelines, which were the addition of, were the two other changes, which was the addition of exterior change review, limited to roofs, siding, windows, and porches, and the addition of review for signage for historic buildings or new construction. Those are the changes. So it's a change to the map and a change to the guidelines.
Which currently doesn't exist, right?
Which does not exist?
The way it is now? Or the way it will be will have review. The way it is now will not have review?
Of which item? They already have guidelines.
You already have, okay.
They've been around since 2005.
Thought so.
Right, so this is an existing document. Most of it is not being changed, but those items are being added. So roofs, windows, porches, and siding and signage. And then by combining them together, the document doesn't have to change that much. It will just simply apply to the entire district.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions on this?
I guess I would make a statement that I live also in a area that has a historic protection overlay, that has an A section and a B section, and I've felt for a long time that having the two sections, the two different classifications within the same neighborhood was not working very well, and so I can certainly see how this neighborhood would benefit from consolidating into just one historic overlay with the same standards of review for the entire neighborhood.
Since it sounds like it was a common practice, is there a reason why there's two different sections, Area A and Area B, the mindset originally?
Yes, that was part of the discussions in 2005 with the residents at the time, with the owners at the time. So they requested that there be a distinction so that the commercial corridors had some minimal protection, but that the main review was towards the residential central area. But as we have witnessed over the years, we have lost some buildings in that corridor, commercial corridor, that like the George Elmore store. So that's kind of triggered a review of that understanding, and perhaps it might benefit the neighborhood to make it one. We also have a similar situation in Lower Waverly, Old Shannon, where there's two areas. So that's just part of the discussions with the neighborhood when it became a district.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if any other guests would like to come to the podium and give their views on this. And if we get, I'd like everyone that would like to talk, but if we're getting repetitive, maybe some of you can represent more than one person to keep it moving. And there's a 2-minute limit now on that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Louis Dessau. I'm a resident of the historic Waverly District, a member of the University of South Carolina faculty and staff. First of all, I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for everything that you do. I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity to present some information in regard to the affordability of rehabilitation, short-term and long-term. One of the concerns that was expressed at one of the neighborhood meetings was the cost that this might imply to residents there. And basically, with or without a protection scheme, it is the obligation of all owners to be maintaining their properties. I won't get into the guidelines, but for a property of about $150,000, it's estimated that their maintenance would be about $2,000. For a residence of a value of about $75,000, it's estimated at about $1,000. So there is no significant increase in the cost of maintenance of any personal property in that area. In the midterm, I would like to say that the investment in Waverly can be quite attractive. Personally, we purchased a property for about $55,000 that otherwise was basically going to be demolished as it had been abandoned for 10 years. With approximately $75,000 in repairs and maintenance, the house is now valued over $150,000, which is quite interesting for revenues for the city and the county. Our experience has been based on 12 houses which my wife and I have restored in the Columbia, none of which have been sold to date. In the long term, historic districts like Waverly see an increase in value of property rather than a decrease. Leveling houses to put parking lots does not add value or income to the city or the county. It is our hope that by implementing the proposed changes, this will help us with marketing objectives that we have to make the neighborhood appealing to alumni from Allen University, Benedict, in a manner similar to what the University of South Carolina has achieved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tina Marshall Bradley, and I would like to thank the Planning Commission for hearing me. I, too, am a resident of historic Waverly. My husband and I took positions in Columbia approximately 15 years ago and specifically moved into Waverly because we wanted our daughter to attend C.A. Johnson Preparatory Academy at that time. Recently, we have committed ourselves to working closer with our neighbors because we wanted others to know about the great things that were going on in the neighborhood. We were working with current leadership on the neighborhood website in order to get more individuals involved in volunteering to build historic Waverly's vast resources. During one of our recent meetings this past summer, a speaker from the Planning and Historic Preservation Division told the story about the demolition of the George Elmore store. That story frightened me and saddened me so much that I rushed home and grabbed my 2 grandchildren who were visiting us at that time from Massachusetts, and I rushed down to the Edwin Russell House Street, which is only 3 houses down from our home. For those of you who may not know, the Edwin Russell House is the home of Edwin Roberts Russell, who was a research scientist directly involved in the Manhattan Project. Simply reading the historic marker in front of the house sparked deep and meaningful conversations that hold personal meaning for me, my grandchildren, and the rest of our family. And ladies and gentlemen, that is just one lesson learned from one summer afternoon. Historic Waverly is a precious resource to Columbia, the state of South Carolina, the United States, and the world. The young people who come to this community to study at Allen University specifically, but also Benedict College and the University of South Carolina also should be exposed to the history of this community. For the short period of time that they are studying in this environment, this living experience provides a tremendous transformative opportunity for them. It is our responsibility as global citizens to do everything in our power to preserve the milieu of this community for the next generation. Whatever monetary, emotional, or human capital that is at our disposal, it is our moral, social, and civic responsibility to preserve the integrity of the historic Waverly community. The residents of historic Waverly ask that you please vote for the Waverly Protection Area Design Guidelines. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the commission, my name is William L. Pyatt, and I'm here today on behalf of First Nazareth Baptist Church. I'd like to ask for members of First Nazareth Baptist Church to please stand.
You brought a few people.
And we're here in opposition to the combining of areas A and B, and in the alternative, have some exemption for a church. As has been pointed out, the guidelines have been in place for about 10 years. And at the present time, as I understand, First Nazareth is in Section B. There's been no problem, been no concerns in terms of A and B working. Now, the new guidelines lump everything in the area into residential and commercial. We have no problem in terms of the residential regulation, but the classifying of a church as commercial and putting those requirements on the church, we think, is an overreach and unnecessary. We realize that the overall scheme is to preserve the integrity of historical residential houses. That's a noble scheme. We are not opposed to that. But we think that to have the guidelines impact on a church, a religious institution, would be a burden on the church and a burden on its members. Therefore, we think that the guidelines should not be accepted as written. There should be we should suggest that you maintain Section A and B, and if you do combine them, that there be some exemption or exception for religious institution. And that way, you would still maintain the intent of restoring and maintaining residential houses, because in one of the notes it said that there's a scheme or design to limit construction to 2 stories, which may not work for some churches. And also keep in mind that there are educational institutions in that area. So they should not be required to subject to those historical type guidelines.
Thank you.
Yeah. My 2 minutes, okay, thanks, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Malcolm Harris. I'm also a resident of Waverly. I invested, just like some of my other neighbors, in homes that were torn down and remodeled. And I wish I would have brought some pictures so you guys could see the work that we were able to do along with Stacy. She can vouch for some of the things that we've done there. We don't want Waverly to become a concrete jungle. And that's what First Nazareth is trying to do to us. They're trying to take 25% of our neighborhood all the way back from Gervais back to Lady Street and commercialize it. That's not right. What he's telling you is disingenuous. And as much as I hate to say it, it's just as disingenuous as the showing of everyone standing up in here, which I live in Waverly. They don't live there, okay? They are not residents. That is a show. That's a false perception, very much like the conversation from our attorney here about their intentions. So, as a member of Waverly, as the vice president of the Community Association, and one who invests in Waverly and back into Columbia, I ask your support with strengthening our overlay for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Robin Waits. I'm the Executive Director with Historic Columbia. Our organization has long been involved with the historic Waverly neighborhood. We've worked with the community to install historic markers and develop a self-guided tour of the district. We have a close working relationship with Allen University, serving as partners and advisors on their historic sites. We've also have a close connection with many of the churches in the district, having participated in events and public programs at First Calvary, at Bishop's Memorial, at St. Luke's, and at First Nazareth. In 2012, at one of these events, we unveiled a historic marker at the George Elmore store, which at the time was in Area B of the district. 1 week after that marker was installed, the building was demolished. By recommending approval to the changes before you today, you ensure that the unvetted removal of historic places like the Elmore store doesn't occur again. You heard from a representative from First Nazareth about the negative impact of changes to the district. However, when closely examined, the proposed changes will have very little impact on this institution. First Nazareth, which owns close to 20% of the lots in the district, would have to adhere to the slightly stricter guidelines that Stacy mentioned earlier for the buildings that they own that are currently in Area A. And that's only if they plan to make changes to those properties. So basic maintenance is not reviewed. Their properties in what is now Area B are already subject to review for new construction, and therefore there would be no additional requirements with proposed changes. So by recommending approval today, you provide much needed protection to some of the neighborhood's most vulnerable sites and a review more appropriate to an historic district of this significance.
Thank you. Are there any other guests who would like to speak today? Or I don't think so. Or can?
Typically, it's not you're here to hear the information. It's not a back and forth.
Right.
If there's more people that want to say something, that's certainly an option.
Right. Any questions from the commission to staff?
I have a question for staff. One of the speakers representing First Nazareth earlier stated that if we were to move forward with a recommendation for these two items, that it would classify the church as commercial. Staff, please tell me whether that is correct or not.
Sure. So, just to clarify, the church was in Area B, so the First Nazareth Church was entirely located in Area B. And that part of the, that's called a commercial corridor, but in the guidelines, we've simply kind of changed the title of that section to non-residential because we understand there are 5 churches and universities here and other buildings, so we have not labeled anything commercial. These buildings have their own set of guidelines. Their guidelines would not change. Area B would still, because we still have the same language, we just retitled it from Area B to non-residential. So essentially, we were recognizing this distinction between residential and non, and we want to make sure that we don't try to make a church look like a house. So the reference to the 2-story height, for instance, would be incorrect. So under our non-residential section, we have a sentence about height saying that height is dictated by zoning. So there may be some misconceptions there, but there's not really anything changing for an existing non-historic building in what was Area B.
Any other questions for staff? Any other guests want to come to the podium who have not spoken? I will call for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve items 13 and 14, the consolidation of Waverly Protection Areas A and B, and the adoption of the new or the revised Waverly Protection Area Guidelines.
Do I have a
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? 13 and 14 are approved.
Mr. Chairman, Rick, let the room clear out and then we can continue onward. Okay.
Thought everybody in Waverly was going to speak to them. Whole neighborhood was going to show up and talk to them.
It's really one of the commercial residential places. So, and I think they're also the one store that they kept up to. That note, if I'm thinking where it's at, they're tore it down. So I think that's also the other part of it, is that you want it, but you don't.
Yeah, Jake, good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, this is it. This is it for me. All day, but fantastic. Glad to give someone else an opportunity. I mean, you know, I've been doing it for 6 years now, so, you know, I think I've made enough people mad or not, where it's just it's time for someone else to do it. So, yeah, I've,
They're not this big a crowd.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, good luck. Thank you. Certainly. Nice to meet you too, Jamie. Appreciate that. Good to see you.
Can you pass the napkins down?
Oh, wow.
I know I don't need this. I'm supposed to go away in if I leave here.
Oh, my.
Here's some napkins.
Look what she made
How
for
about
you,
that?
Jim.
Trying to fatten us up.
The chocolate in my pocket for later. How about that?
That's fine.
I don't know about that.
She made those for you.
Isn't that incredibly nice of her?
I didn't make them. I don't know who made them.
I think, what's her name?
Say.
Where is she? If every other bit, we have some other business to continue with.
Just take one. You can pass them.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Josh and to Jean for serving on this commission. This is their last meeting, and I didn't know Josh was leaving today. But Jean, I did want to give you something, since you have been with me the whole time as vice chairman.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you very
And
much.
I believe John has a few words he would like to say as well.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to both Gene and Josh's term actually is up next month, but he won't be here due to some other commitments. So this will actually be his last time also. But just to say thank you for serving, and we hope that you'll choose to serve on another board or commission in the future.
And look what we did for you both today. Had a big crowd. Doesn't get any better.
Out with a bang.
If there's no other business,
I have no other business.
then I'll call for an adjournment. So moved. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you all.